Hello, world, and welcome back to Practicing Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. My name is Sarah, and I'm here with my friend Lizelle. And today we're going to be talking about episode 30, which is called Relevance Realization Meets Dynamical Systems Theory. And with that mouthful, I'm going to pass it over to Lizelle to get us started with a quote.
Hello, world. Yes, I'm going to surprise myself because it's been quite a while that I've selected this quote, so I'm not quite sure what it's going to be. But it is from Plato. So let's see if it's relevant. Socrates. And now let me ask you, what is the art which we take care of ourselves, Alcibiades? I cannot say, Socrates. At any rate, thus much has been admitted, that the art is not one which makes any of our possessions, but which makes ourselves better. L. True. Socrates. But should we ever have known what art makes a shoe better if we did not know a shoe? L. Impossible. Socrates. Nor should we know what art makes a ring better if we did not know a ring. L. That is true. Socrates. And can we ever know what art makes a man better if we do not know what we are ourselves? L. Impossible. Socrates. And is self knowledge such an easy thing? And was he to be lightly esteemed who inscribed the text on the temple at Delphi? Or is self knowledge a difficult thing which few are able to attain? L. At times I fancy, Socrates, that anybody can know himself. At other times, the task appears to be very difficult. Socrates. But whether easy or difficult, Alcibiades, still there is no other way. Knowing what we are, we shall know how to take care of ourselves. And if we are ignorant, we shall not know. L. That is true. Socrates. Well then, let us see in what way the self-existent can be discovered by us. That will give us a chance of discovering our own existence, which otherwise we can never know.
And you didn't pick that.
Like I picked it and then I put it on the list of things to read with Sarah. So I wasn't sure what, but it was pretty cool.
I mean, it really reflected on fitness and moving yourself into but it's like mental fitness. So that's why I was like,
Yeah,
whoa, that's like literally right on point for this
yeah,
episode. And because he was like art and health at the very beginning. So I wrote that down because I was like, where are we going with this? And yeah, knowing the self and something auto poetic
yeah,
in that too. So it's
yeah.
really on point.
Oh, lovely. Well spotted.
Well, that puts us to the beginning of this decidedly difficult episode, I guess I could say. It was a lot to digest. I actually wrote notes on this a week ago and then rewatched it after taking notes because that's how dense it was for me to even get through the first, like him just going back over what relevance realization or what relevance is. So, yeah, what were your reflections on this one?
I I was tired when I watched it, so I'm not sure if that contributed to my overall feeling of ugh, because I had a feeling of ugh, and I know this is his scientific obsession, as he says, and I get it because I know we're going to the elegance part where how relevance realization, the theory of realization, manifest in spirituality, meaning in life, and those things that he's saying. So I know why this is important and that this is important. And I managed again to simplify it to myself, basically, because I need to put things in buckets or something, categorize, I guess I need to
Categories.
categorize in order to make sense of things. So I put it in two main buckets this episode, and that helped. And there were some things that I was like, oh yeah, I remember that from watching it the previous time because that's very relevant to my life. So, so yeah. So it was a struggle,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not sure it's a struggle just because of the high intellectual challenge or because of the fact that the light is dying. It
Yeah.
might be both.
Yeah. Do you reckon that's related? As the environment changes, so too does our take on the information.
It sounds very true, doesn't it?
All right. So, yes, that's exactly this episode. So let's get into it. He begins, as he always does, with the recap of the last episode where we talked about relevance realization. And he was kind of using theory of relevance and theory of relevance realization interchangeably. But he said he was going to get more into why they could not be used interchangeably. And so he discusses at the beginning of this episode, where we really start to get into the content, the reason for which, or I guess the reasons for which there cannot be a scientific explanation of relevance.
That's the first big bucket I have. There cannot be a scientific theory of relevance, and that goes on and about till about 20 minute 28. And I was
That's a big
very,
bucket.
I, I was very like that today, like, and yes, and so uh, then he explains what science is and what science can study and how relevance is not one of the things that science can study. That's the big line of this first bucket.
Mhm.
But let's go into the detail.
Okay. There's something where he's saying how science works. It's
Yes.
generating inductive generalizations, which is
Yes.
the broadest possible powerful way of predicting and explaining.
Yeah. So a lot of things popped up for me in that. First, I had to look up the term inductive because
Oh.
it's one of those words that you know, but you're not sure that you know.
Mm-hmm.
And also I looked up induce because they seem to relate to each other, but the meaning of induce seems to be a bit different from inductive. So
From my running knowledge of that word, I would suspect that but I wouldn't have made that connection until you said that. It would be very different. But could you explain how? Because induce I
okay,
know from labor.
induce is also to bring about something.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that's very different from inductive. But in my mind, the two were two, and that's probably why I got confused. What does John always say? You shouldn't equate things. So I was
Yeah.
equating the terms.
Equivocation.
Bad girl, bad
Bad.
Sally. So you live, you learn, though, right? So I did look it up, and the first the definition I found was very much not. It used basically words that I also don't feel that comfortable with to explain it. Basically the same type of things. But this one I found quite helpful. Inductive, a way to describe something that leads to something else. So when applied to reasoning, it just means collect information and draw conclusions from what you observe. So basically, it sounds to me like generalization. So it sounds almost like it says generalization, generalization. So observing and drawing conclusions and generalizing from that. That's
It's funny
basically
because,
what.
well, I wrote generating inductive generalization. So my sentence reads, in your words, generating generalization generalizations.
And then those conclusions that you draw, you generalize. You look at gold because he uses gold the whole time as something that you can actually study scientifically. You look at gold, a piece of gold, and you say, oh, this is the quality of gold. This is the what gold is made of, and this is uh, its chemical structure or whatever you want to say. And then from that you can uh, conclude that all gold will have these properties.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. There
that
was,
is, I think, what inductive generalizations is.
so it's like, yeah. And so now, like, I'm getting a feel for what scientific would be in, there's something about, I don't know, properties of it that you can measure.
Yeah. Similar properties. That's a homogenous thing, which is very important. So it has to share properties and important properties. Like then he goes into the whole white thing. It can't
Right.
just show the property of being white, because that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't make it a category at all.
Mm-hmm.
Because a paper is white and a wall is white potentially, and things like that. So it doesn't share anything of significance that you can then
Yeah.
generalize from.
Right.
So it has to be properties, which, and then he goes into the essence thing. And
Yeah.
I want to say properties which relates to the essence. And I'm not sure if that is correct, but it does seem that if something
Yeah.
doesn't have an essence, you can't really study it scientifically.
Right. Hmm.
That seems to
Exactly.
be the next thing he goes into.
Okay, I want to play with that because I was thinking that anything outside of science, it's almost like a I know you can't like say only scientific things can be studied in this mathematical logical way, but it felt to me like you were saying the non-science could be studied through essence. Maybe not studied, but just expressed through essence. But no, I guess not because triangles have essence is one of the things that he went into.
Yeah, the category of triangles has an essence, identifiable essence. That is essentially what it is. Uh, I think we should be careful to say scientific things, because science is a method.
Yeah.
It's not a thing in its own. It's just a method of knowing.
Yeah.
And
So I guess maybe if I wanted to clarify that, which I don't even know that I do, but the scientific things that I'm describing are things that can be described through science. So they are measurable. So I could just say measurable things instead, or logical, mathematical. That's what kind of what I was getting at. But I don't need like I'm not even like defending what I just presented as far as what I said about essence because I don't think that's right
no,
now. But for some reason, essence was coming up through like you could describe it through the romantics, and so that was kind of where my mind.
I'm not asking you to defend it. I'm more curious, like what was going in your mind, because I'm also struggling, to
Yeah.
figure out, like, what do we mean? What do we mean
Yeah.
when we say these things?
Yeah.
That's more like I'm just trying to uh, also understand what I'm thinking.
Okay, so this is I think this is going to help. So it says science gives us powerful inductive generalizations, and if they are powerful enough, science gives us the essence of something. So it's like those inductive generalizations can be powerful enough to give us the essence of something.
Okay. So then I see why my mind went like to, it has to have some sort of essence
Yep.
in order to be scientifically studyable. Because,
Right.
can you say it again, please?
Yep. Science gives us powerful inductive generalizations, and if they are powerful enough, science gives us the essence of something.
So deductive essences is like a triangle and gold. It's
Hmm.
something that
Yep.
we deduce. Inductive essences is Quine's idea of how we, via this inductive generalizations, can come to the essence.
Nice.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's what Wittgenstein talk, talked about.
We're going to quote some Wittgenstein.
He said many of our categories don't have essences,
Right.
and
And the reverse is also the case.
yeah, that there are categories that it's clearly deductive essences, like in themselves
Hmm.
mathematical properties, for instance, like triangles. But there are also categories that have inductive
Yeah.
essences. If we are capable through inductive generalizations to um, to mm, to identify properties that are homogeneous, we might just get to their essences. And I
Hmm.
know I'm just repeating what we've
It is
said,
good.
but I'm doing it on purpose to
Yeah.
get my mind around it.
Yeah, exactly. It's a brain bender. Many things don't have an essence. The reverse is also the case. We can't have a scientific explanation for everything.
Yeah. So then that's why I think I said we can only have scientific explanations for things who have essences.
Hmm.
And I think I agree with me.
Okay. Then this is again, he's saying that you mentioned the white things already, but even though those categories are as white things doesn't support an inductive generalization because those categories aren't homogenous.
You don't learn anything from white paper. Well, if you study white paper, you don't learn anything fundamentally
Mm-hmm.
important or essential about a white wall, except
Yeah.
that they're white.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that you learn, which does not tell you anything about walls or about paper, really.
Yeah, and he keeps emphasizing this part, and I think it's going to be important. So definitely worth mentioning that this licenses it no metaphysical weirdness.
Yeah,
That
I wrote.
the white doesn't contain an essence that doesn't afford it any medical metaphysical weirdness. So yeah,
He uses a lot of very interesting terms, but that's the only one I wrote down as well. Like it's all kinds of things that I think people attribute strange things to. He uses, but metaphysical weirdness is the one I wrote down as well.
yeah,
Now, it's true and it's real. Just because you can't explain something scientifically doesn't mean it's not true or real, or
yeah.
that you have to deduce from that it's metaphysically a bit weird. It's
Hmm.
like, yeah,
Yeah. I see what he's doing there. So that's
yeah,
definitely worth mentioning. And then
yes,
he says he gives the example of the horse, and once you know something about a horse, then you know something true of horses because that's the essence of the horse, I guess. Because what I have written down next is that the category is stable, and he mentions the pun of
yeah,
having a horse in the stable, which is
yeah.
cute. I'm glad he explained it because at first I was like, "What the fuck." My brain's so all discombobulated, and then you throw in a discrete joke. um,
And then he explains like that you don't shouldn't equate again, like don't make a stable that type of thing. But yeah,
Okay. He says, what's in there? If what is in there is constantly changing, you get equivocation.
mm.
If what's in that stable is a different horse every time, no, I'm just kidding.
No, if it's like now it's a pig, now it's a horse, and then you're gonna, and which will not be, you're gonna have to go a level up, and now it's mammals.
Yeah.
It's not just a horse, it's mammals.
Yeah.
But
Well, that's a great example because then you're equivocating pigs with horses in that example. They're mammals. They're the
yeah,
same. He says something about astrology here. I'm just gonna leave it. I'm just kidding. But I was like, okay, like that part is I agree 100% with that, that astrology is not scientific. That's why I make that argument all the time to people. So it feels good now to have though this idea of essence because that's something that I can at least collect data on. Whether or not I can study it, fine. But
yeah.
that's how I
But
use astrology.
if you're able to collect data on essences, then it means it's scientifically studyable.
I think that's debatable because whether or not I'm actually measuring something, I'm
Yeah.
not measuring anything, but what I'm doing is relating with others, collecting stories and seeing some sort of
Mm.
data that you can, not
A
necessarily
through line. I
scientifically.
think the word that you're looking for is a through line instead of
Mm.
essences, which feels
Mm,
very close to each other as well.
yeah. And I was going to say there's something too about this ever changing environment that
Yeah.
even if I am collecting data on it, I'm at least collecting where the changes are happening, astronomically or really astrologically, because it is all from our perspective, our geocentric perspective that I collect data. So, but it's at least collecting the environmental information as it is in the sky, things that never change. We base our calendars on that same information. So it's not
Mhm,
puzzling for a human to use orbs in the sky to predict,
mhm,
or I guess not even predict, but that's not where I'm going with it, to describe a time in
mhm,
history. If you can document that time in history and where the planetary positions were and just a couple of headlines,
mhm.
it's not scientific because the headlines are, I don't know. I don't know why it's not scientific, but yeah, maybe I'm talking myself into believing it's scientific, but I honestly think it has to do with people's misunderstanding of what astrology is too.
Mhm.
So I think a lot of people think that it's you sit in a cave and intuition comes to you, which is totally possible for some people, but there's
But that's
something
not
mathematical.
astrology. That's a different form of
You're right,
divination.
divination. Yeah,
Um,
exactly. So there is something calculated, at least,
um,
about astrology and whether, but the problem is, I think he even speaks to it somewhere in here. Well, it's not repeatable, but anyway, I won't go into it.
Maybe
Where
the
do I
stable thing, that it's not really stable in
Yeah,
that sense.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and so this is where it gets into like a good analogy with fittedness or with evolution. The
Mhm.
environment's changing. So there's nothing stable about the environment. How am I going to study something that's unstable in a stable way? I have to have
Mm,
controls. How do you have
mm,
controls? You eliminate
mm,
certain parts of the experiment from your view. They're like, okay, we're going to control
mm.
for this, and that's going, that's just going to control for it, I guess. So we don't have a control because there's not a separate universe outside of ours for me to say, well, in the absence of humans, this is how it happens.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And
that's
also, it's easy to study the life of a fruit fly because it's quite short compared to ours.
mhm.
But our lives are also pretty short compared to most things in the
Yeah,
universe. So um, we can only study from our short life perspective.
exactly.
So yeah,
That's a deep place. I like that. So stable. How do we get to stable? How do we get back to stable?
it has to be general. So the horses, it has to be generalizable. You can look at one horse and generalize to all horses. Categories are stable. Usually, I mean, like maybe minus a leg or something, but the basic idea stays the same about the horse. Um, and, and this is
Mhm.
important. The properties are internal or inherent,
Yes.
uh, like uh, like gold and not like money. Like gold has its value or its properties in not value because value is changeable,
Yeah.
but its properties are in gold itself. The properties that it had is in gold itself. Money, not so much, um, because we give it the properties that we um, it's relational and it's attributed. That's important. Like a lot of the properties are relational and attributed, and that also makes it kind of difficult to study scientifically, if not impossible.
Mm. Properties that are not intrinsic to the object but are in relationship to us.
And
Yeah.
maybe that's also something you can say about the stars.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah, they're totally relational. And that's why I love getting other people's stories because I hear how other people relate with it.
yeah,
But there's
mm,
something like an entity that it's, you
mm.
know, that's just the easy. Oh man. Whoa. Okay. The entity idea, of course, God, like, and it feels like all of these things are something that you're pressing up on God, like relevance, realization. Yeah. Same thing as ritual, same thing as astrology. And that's why I'm like, it's not easy to articulate. It's not easy to describe how I feel like it's all the same, not an entity, but just something that you can press upon or press against and I don't know, absorb some of.
No,
And then,
by participation, but not propositionally or not scientifically,
yeah. Yeah. That's interesting.
to use John's words.
Okay. I'm like, no, okay, that's exactly what I'm feeling. Like he's got a good way of identifying feelings through words like that.
And that is why, because I know a lot of people complain about the fact that he uses these big words, and I complain about the fact that sometimes when he throws in unnecessary Latin, but his terms is not unnecessary. It's tools. Like what I just did
Yep.
was use these tools to explain what you were trying to say, to put it in different ways that you were like, oh yeah, that's it. That's exactly it.
Mhm.
And that is the importance of having his vocabulary at
Yeah.
your disposal because it does help understanding. And it's
Yeah.
about understanding. That's what we understanding ourselves. Coming back to Socrates and Alcibiades, it's that understanding that we're after. And the tools of the words
Yep.
is really helpful in that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing because it's like the words reframe the problem. Like you get that instant reframe if you can just,
Yes.
well, here, I'm going to put it in these words and now it's understandable. Now it's easier to
Yeah.
digest.
Yes.
Yeah, it feels really important and I know kind of where it's going. Like my brain is foreshadowing where this idea is going with the properties that are not intrinsic to the object but are in relationship to us. But
Yeah, we can get to its inductive essence. They have to
Mm.
have these properties.
And that's that they are homogenous, stable, which was what we just talked about, and intrinsic or inherent.
Yeah. It has to be in the thing itself.
What was I don't remember how he like brought this one in, but he was like Tuesday events. It's not homogenous or something like that. Tuesday events. Like, okay.
I think he's what, because I just have like not money, not a bottle, not Tuesday, but gold. Like, so I just wrote down
Nice.
his examples. I didn't really go into the detail of what he said, but because I think with coming back to Tuesday again, he was just hammering in that point, like just because you can't um uh get to its inductive essence, just because you can't study it scientifically, doesn't mean it's not real.
Hmm.
Tuesdays are real. Things that happen on Tuesday are real. Things happen on Tuesday. It would be freaky if if Tuesday is like we all were just like starting to float around. It's like, oh, it's a Tuesday. It's like, oh, everything is like
Not this
in
one.
this.
Well, and see, I can get to now I can like kind of present some of that like mystical side where people think things are mystical because of every Mercury retrograde, of every time Sun conjunct, the moon, every time we get a new moon, there's something mystical happening. And it isn't like it feels like that, especially when you're reading the charts and then things come around that say the exact same words you used in your report. I'm speaking from experience, but I don't feel like those are um special or otherworldly supernatural events. It's just describing like weather patterns to me, what's possible. So that is another place where I feel like a resistance, a feeling of needing to defend but also not, also just kind of
Mhm,
presenting the perspective of an astrologer of just
mhm.
saying that's yeah, I get where there's the need to, I guess, just emphasize this part about
Mm.
things just that not it's not inherently whimsical or mystical that these events occur.
My focus was more on the fact that it's not real. Like that's what
Mm,
John tried to emphasize. Just because you can't study something scientifically doesn't mean it's not real. He doesn't like that type of thinking that if something can't be studied scientifically,
yeah,
then it means it's bullshit. That's
right.
not something, an equation he will make. And I thought that's what he was emphasizing in this
I see.
more than going against, because he's all for mystical experiences.
Mm-hmm.
He talked about it in the beginning, and I'm quite sure he's going to get to it later in the series again.
Yeah. Okay.
So but what I do think maybe could be useful for you is um, I'm currently writing an apology for my faith. But I don't know if that's the right word. But in theology, you have apologetics, which is kind of writing a defense of your faith towards someone who doesn't. Calvin's Institute starts with a letter to someone who was like, "What the hell is these Protestants doing?" So, and that's apologetics. Like, and the
Mm,
first Christians all wrote apologetics. And so defending or trying to, is actually also kind of a way to figure out, getting a better understanding of your own uh, points of view and what you hold to be true, rather than I don't see it as like I'm really trying to convince someone else. Like
right.
I'm just trying to figure out what it is it actually
Yeah.
that I'm believing. Uh, and
Yeah.
maybe state it for the people who share my beliefs, because that's what Calvin did. Like he stated it also. Well,
Mm,
no, I don't even know that that was in his intention, because the letter clearly stated that it was for a prince that he wrote it. But we
mm,
now, as Calvinists, read it as like dogmatics. But that's not how it was written. It was written, the first church, like I said, full of apologetics. It's like because they really had to defend their faith because they were tortured because of it, Polycarpus and people like that.
mm, mm. Yeah,
So I,
exactly.
I think, yeah. So by all means, like, you know, struggle it out. How does this relate to astrology? And not
Yeah.
because you need to defend yourself to anyone,
Right.
but because like the better you can understand your art, the better, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it was like there was a mention of it, and I think that was like what put me in
Through
a
you.
position where it felt like I needed to. Like,
Yeah.
okay, so I need to describe like why I do what I do.
But I think
Um,
that's an important uh, initiating step. Okay,
okay.
I think we know systematic, right? Let's
I
look
feel
into.
like import and induce could kind of be similar too with the way you use
Yeah,
them.
I didn't look this one up. I think by
Hmm.
this time I've given up.
We are kind of on a struggle bus here in the middle. Okay.
My basically my Google, every time I write any word, it adds meaning afterward automatically because that's what I look up most. I look up words and then meaning. Bring goods or services. Okay, but this we know that it brings good or services in a country. That's importing. Okay,
Import.
archaic. Maybe that's how you indi- indicate or signify.
Mm,
Having thus seen what is imported in a man's trusting his heart.
that's import. It's weird. The way that that was just, yeah, I don't know.
Maybe that's what it is. It doesn't signify anything systematic. Maybe he uses the archaic way of signify. And I think you should leave this in, like, people can see how one's supposed to struggle through these
Yes, a
things.
struggle here. Relevance does not have systematic import. So you're saying relevance does not have,
Anything systematic that it indicates or signifies.
okay.
That sounds as if it can be right,
Yeah.
right?
It does not have anything systematic that it indicates
Oh
or
yeah,
signifies.
it does, because relevance, you don't, like, this is not, he uses, like, this is not always relevant. It's relevant now
Right.
because I need to
Yeah.
write. Like,
Yeah.
so it doesn't always signify something, the same thing. That's basically what it means.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not homogenous. That's what I wrote down next, although the whole thing kind of says it. So yeah, yeah, it doesn't signify the same thing always. Relevance. It's not, once relevant isn't always relevant, and
Yeah.
now relevant is not relevant after our conversation ended, type of thing. It doesn't always indicate the same thing. I think that's basically what he's saying.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. It doesn't always indicate the same thing. Yeah.
Mm.
It's not repeatable. I don't know. If we're thinking of it from like the scientific,
Scientific, because it needs to be
mm,
repeatable.
it needs to be repeatable. Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. We'll go with it.
But I think that's more, the test itself needs to be repeatable. So not the things that's tested. Um,
That's true.
but yeah, it's, yeah. There's not a continuity in time and space or something
Mm.
like that. It's like
Okay.
it changes. It's not homogeneous, homogeneous. How do I pronounce
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. Yeah. You had it. Homogeneous.
Homogeneous, homogeneous.
I think.
Yes, it's not stable. So it
Right.
kind of all says the same thing. It's not the same. It's not stable. It's not the same. It
Yeah.
doesn't stay
Yeah.
the same.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it kind of it's a kind of coming together. Yum, 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 yum. It's kind of coming together in that it's just like duh. Like
It,
it becomes obvious that
yes.
relevance isn't something that just sticks with this
Yeah.
object. It's like
Yeah. And when we
relevance
get later
moves.
to Darwin, it's going to be why, and then it
Okay.
makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
But yeah. Yeah, but it's good that we struggle through this, because this
Yeah.
is what it's we're supposed to do, struggle through these.
Need more coffee. No, okay. So then I have this sentence written. I don't think it'll take as much to get through, but it's relevance is relevant to an autopoetic thing. He kind of really starts to emphasize this because,
Yeah,
yeah, relevance is relevant to an autopoetic thing, which is something that is trying to self organize and maintain that self organization through self organization.
yeah. And he mentions this in relation to, it is not intrinsic to the object. This pencil is not relevant. Like, everyone should love this, should find this pencil absolutely relevant in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
I often do. I have very many pencils, but they get lost. So, and I can't read without a pencil. I have this weird thing, I have to have a pencil in my hand to read. So for me, it's quite a relevant object, but it's
Yes.
not in the object itself, its
Right.
relevance. It's
In
in my
relationship to
relation.
you. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm
I
starting to see.
attribute it to it. And
Yeah.
for my autopoietic processes, because I
Yeah.
read for transformation, it's really important. to have a pencil in my hand.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. I just drank out of a cup, which is only a cup because I drank out of it.
Yes, you attributed the relevance thereof to
I
it.
see.
And at this stage, it is highly relevant because it is containing coffee.
Yes, and we need it for this episode. Okay, and then the next thing I have written is there can be no essence to relevance and nothing is essentially relevant, which is basically what we just said.
Yes. Yes, that's what I wrote
That's
it
an
as well.
interesting addition, though. There can be no essence to relevance
Mm.
and nothing is essentially relevant. So we kind of now, yeah, that whole part was describing how there can be no essence to relevance.
Yeah.
Wow.
And what this, in other words, say is relevance cannot be scientifically studied because we can only study scientifically things with an essence.
So he says empiricists detect relevance and romantics project relevance, which leads us
Okay,
into the next. Go ahead.
yeah, we're going to the next, because I said I had these two buckets for understanding this
Yeah.
episode.
Yep.
We're now going to the next bucket,
Okay.
which is
Oh,
relevance realization
got
and
it.
the fact that that can be scientifically studied,
Okay.
or John's um, claim that it can be scientifically studied.
There we go.
Yeah, yeah, and
So go ahead. Yeah. How does that relate with what I said?
yeah. So he says relevance realization. It's one of the things that I should know how to pronounce if I'm going to be a Verweke follower.
It's a bit of a tongue twister.
Relevance realization is not relevance detection, and that's the empiricist that you were referring to. The empiricist said, like, well, it is out there in the world and we just need to detect it, we just need to see it and find it and name it. But relevance realization is also not just projection. So what the romantic said is, like, there's nothing in there, we make it. We just project the relevance on it. So John is kind of saying here uh, that relevance realization is something in between. It's both out there and in us. We both make it and find it. We realize it in
Mhm.
the Johnian word, that the one Johnian word that the entire coven loves.
Yes. Realize.
We realize it, and he also has a he talks about not subjective, not objective, but transjective. So
Hmm.
it's between us, between between the two. It's which then I have to think of Booba, but then I'm gonna go on a very way offline.
So I like that. Empiricists and romantics detecting and projecting, but maybe it's transjecting somewhere in between.
Mm.
And so he brings up Darwin because that's something that Darwin studied very, yeah, a lot. I was going to say
Well,
religiously because it was funny because the clergymen were the ones studying the natural world before Darwin, but so he did study it religiously in that way.
important to mention, he uses Darwin as an analogy,
I
or
see.
Darwin studies as an analogy to studying relevance realization.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just important to mention.
Yeah.
That
It's funny. Like we talked about how once you know a horse, you know the kind of like properties of a horse, or once you know one horse, then you know horse. And for some reason, like it does like feel that way about relevance. Like I know natural selection and evolution so well that it just makes sense, relevance realization. It doesn't necessarily mean I can describe it, but in its relationship with evolution and natural selection, it's yeah, that's what it is.
yeah. But you now did what John said he did previously in the previous episode. You're kind of equating relevance and relevance realization. And I know it
Mm,
was just the way you spoke and you didn't mean to
yeah.
do that. But
Yeah.
it is important to keep the two separate.
Okay, well let's just get into the Darwin
Analogy.
Yeah. So the analogy of this insight of Darwin's. So he said that natural world, before Darwin, the natural world was studied by clergymen, so that they could try to understand the essence of design. So we've talked about the word essence, and now they're trying to understand the essence of this design, this amazing place that we live in, and also ourselves, our bodies, and how they function. So there's like trying to understand, like, what is all this? And the
It's part of
clergyman.
our theology studies even. Like how do we know God? Through his Bible and through nature, because he's the creator. So by studying nature, you get to know the creator.
One of the insights of Darwin is that things don't have an essential design. Organisms' capacity to survive for reproduction is fittedness.
Yes. And fittedness, and this is important, is not homogenous. Is that the right way to say it?
Yeah.
Yes.
There's no
That's
essential
important.
design for fittedness.
Yeah. And then
No.
he goes into explaining like some some environments it's better to be small. Some environments it's better to be big.
Mhm.
Some environments it's better to be soft. Some environments it's better to be hard. So there's nothing like, oh, if I'm this, I will be fitted everywhere, always.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
having a high intelligence like what human beings have, like that's pretty big on having a general fittedness that made
Yeah.
us pretty good at this
Yeah.
whole survival game. But it's still not. If we come up to certain animals in certain environments, we're
Yeah.
gonna lose.
Exactly. Yeah. And we're conditioning ourselves to lose. That's what we're doing with our comforts.
Yeah, yeah,
There will come a time when these comforts are no longer accessible to us. And will we have evolved at that point? Probably not, because there's no reason to evolve because we're comfortable. If we're
yeah.
successful in this, it's going to take a shocking environment and bottleneck, and
Mhm,
the species will have
mhm,
another one of those moments, like whatever
yeah.
fucking year it was, 1054. Whatever we talked about in the episode, probably six also.
No, that
um,
was even one of the first ones because I remember I was still studying, struggling with the word New Paleolithic.
mhm. Wow, memories. um, okay, so that was good. So the meat of that was no essential design for fittedness. And because it's not nothing is homogenous because the environment changes.
Mm.
And niches and ways there are niches and ways that can promote fittedness. So the uh, essence of that is that Darwin just needed a theory about how an organism is fitted and being defined and redesigned by a dynamic process.
So he didn't need a theory of fittedness. Like John says, we don't need a theory of relevance. He needed a theory of the evolution of fittedness. Like John says, we need a theory of the realization of relevance.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the analogy that he's making
Mm-hmm.
here. It's the process, it's not the thing.
Yeah. There is no essence to fittedness, but I don't need a theory of fittedness. I need a theory for how fittedness is constantly being realized in a self organizing fashion.
Yeah.
So then one might be led to say there is no essence to relevance, which he said. But I don't need a theory of relevance. I need a theory for how relevance is constantly being realized in a self organizing fashion.
And it almost felt to me like he's very much equating relevance with evolution here. Or relevance realization. See, there I did it as well. It's so easy to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Relevance realization with a theory of evolution.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's a nice analogy of fittedness is to evolution well, wait, fittedness is to the evolution of fittedness as relevance is to the relevance realization.
Yes.
And then even so, relevance and fittedness can be kind of related through their relationship that way.
Hmm.
It is,
Hmm.
I mean, yeah. It's it's such a paradox, I don't know. It's hard to describe what's happening in my brain right now because
I bet you John could.
Yeah, exactly. He has words for this. The point, like fittedness is actually our achievement as humans is relevance as a fitness, as being fit. Re- Relevance realization is what makes us fitted.
Because it helps us survive, because we
Yep.
avoid that combinatorially explosion.
Yeah.
When we need to, uh, we know what to pay attention. We somehow know what to pay attention to, what is relevant, in
So
order to
this is
survive.
it's almost sinister than what advertisers do. I mean, it is changing our relevance because that changes our ability to survive. If
Yeah.
what we find relevant is not actually helping us to survive anymore, because
But if you think about it, what
the
we
whole
find relevant,
reason
is it helping us to survive? Like, just
it's
thinking of ads, a juicy
yeah,
burger, I mean,
yeah,
very relevant when you see it, because
right.
everything, so saliva starts flowing and everything. Does it help us to survive? So then he says Darwin made the first dynamical system theory. And then he uses a word or description of relevance, which is beautiful, bigger words even. So thank God for in this way, at least he chose the easier words. Relevance instead of cognitive interactional fittedness. But that does connect relevance and fittedness very well. Makes it very
Mm-hmm.
clear how they are related.
Mm-hmm.
Cognitive interactional fittedness, which indeed, like you said, is probably our big thing as humans. But like, but I think that's part of the cognitive advantage that we have, is like we go in bundles. That's our other advantage. But we're not alone in that. But that does help us as well. That did help us as well, working
Mm-hmm.
together.
Yeah, yeah, he's going to get into economies, right?
Mm. Hmm.
Yeah. Um, okay, so that was the nice analogy that connects the relevance with the cognitive or the biological fittedness. It's
Hmm.
cognitive interactional fittedness, which all evolve. And um, then I get into constraining the search space. I'll elaborate. Systematic constraints regulate a feedback loop, sensory motor feedback loop. What did you have next? Seems like it was
What do
something.
we need? I wrote the next thing I wrote
That's
on
what
is,
we
what do
need
we need?
then. Maybe that's what we
What?
need is the sensory motor
What?
feedback loop.
Oh, yeah, I have sensory motor feedback loops and the sensing, acting, sensing. So that is how we work. That is the whole autopiotic way of being.
What do we need?
We hmm?
What do we need?
No, that's the next. No,
Oh,
the what do you need? We need is more for what do we need for this theory? So
oh okay. What do we need for food?
survival, survival. It is, yeah.
Matters. It matters.
But I was also thinking, like, it's good not to have children too young, because then your body's going to tell you to keep surviving.
Yeah,
Because
right.
until you procreated, you have to survive.
That I mean, that's what we say in biology. That is like the winning the game in biology. That's what they say is progeny. But
Mm,
that's what I'm seeing in this new relevance is the ability to say actually maybe in order to aspire towards this life, then
mhm.
the relevance of that being the winning you know w- the way to win the game. There's actually other ways now that we have cognition to pass on progeny, and they're autopoetic because they live, and it's my ideas, the memes moving in to the future.
This is a very delicate subject, I find, because I think one of the one of our greatest privileges of women in this age is that we have choice. We can choose what we create, whether
Mm-hmm.
children or ideas or art or anything else.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also a terrible option to have, to not have children. Because, and a friend said this, and I totally related. Part of me really mourns the fact that I never had children, because that's such a feminine experience that I will never have. But another part of me would not want it any other way, because I love my life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's such a weird place to be in. And
Yeah.
I think it's important, and that's why I'm saying it now. I think it's important to say to young women, choose wisely. You're going to lose. Whichever choice you make,
Yeah.
you're going to lose. You're going to sacrifice something. Either the experience of motherhood, which is, I imagine, beautiful and so deeply a feminine thing to have, or you're going to lose this freedom and a life created um, to things that you think is maybe of a different level of relevance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like either way you lose. That was where you hit me. Because you do.
I mean, you gain a lot as well,
Yeah,
either
exactly.
way, but you also lose.
Yeah.
I always say people are, and I consider myself relatively optimistic, but the whole, whenever one door opens,
Yep.
another, or whenever one door closes, another door opens.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, whenever one you walk through one door, a million other doors closes.
Yep.
That's also reality.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, and it's for everyone. I think it's one of those things, because, a man can know what it's like to not be a dad ever. And it's really like the fact that I got so emotional about it is kind of the thing that's question like what is that? Because most of the people I know that are moms, they
Mhm,
have no room to explore their mind, themselves, who they are, what they want. They get
mhm,
locked into having to be in a role, and you have to stay in that role because now you're playing a character for
mhm,
influence over something
mhm,
at all
mhm,
times. And yeah, I mean, it's not something that I envy for people that are my age that have kids, that they didn't
mhm.
get to explore the mind space.
And it's important that we aren't so afraid of losing opportunities that we don't make decisions, because that's
Yep.
of course also what happens.
Yeah. You
And
lose opportunities while you wait. Yeah.
maybe that is easier for men, because we kind of by default have like by not doing, we're deciding. By not doing before a certain age, we're deciding.
Well, you got me again. I don't, I mean, the emotions came over, but it was nice to be able to like work through, like, okay, what was that about? Like,
Mm,
I'm not heartbroken because I don't have kids, but whenever you said there's a choice that needs, duh, that's always the case. And so,
mm,
but it's nice to hear it from that perspective because I don't think women say that a lot. I don't think that that
mm,
part is really said out loud enough, especially not to young girls.
mhm.
Okay, so let's get back into it then. The search space and containing the search space. So that's what we need then. We need to constrain the search space. Yeah.
Yes, yes. A set of properties that are subsemantic.
We need a subsemantic set of bioeconomical properties. And then he says the bioeconomical, what is that? Bioeconomical properties he first mentions this is not financial. Finance. That's that was my first thought.
Because that was the most relevant probably to you at the moment.
Yeah. He says economy is just something that's self-organizing, or maybe he
Mhm.
just says economy is self-organizing and dealing with the uses of resources.
Yeah, the economy is a self-organizing system. It's important that it's a system, constantly
Mm,
dealing with allocation of resources. Yeah.
nice. And in the case of like, it might be time, it could be metabolic energy, it could be processing power, but it's yeah, he now I guess is moving into preserving the bioeconomy. What kind of norms are at work in a bioeconomy? And he says, logistical norms. How can I best use limited resources? And I have two under logistical norms, efficiency and resiliency.
Yes. Yes, and he goes into efficiency and resiliency, but before that, he says he states a question, and I put question in like this, a question. Um, what if relevance realization is the ongoing evolution of our cognitive interactive fitness? That there is some virtual engine that is regulating the sensory motor loop and is regulating it by regulating the bioeconomy, and it's regulating the bioeconomy in terms of logistical norms like efficiency and resiliency. This can be studied scientifically. If there is such a process or all these things, this would be able to be studied scientifically. Hence, then relevance realization will be able to be studied
Mhm.
scientifically. I almost feel like I caught him out there, like, ha, I got what you're trying to do.
Good, you were listening. So I'm picking up on that sensory engine and still relating this relevance realization as an ongoing evolution, just as an analogy of our cognitive interactional fittedness. And I also wrote down think about multiscalar way that bioeconomy is organized to function as
Yes,
autonomous, autonomic nervous system.
yes. So he gives an example. He states clearly it's only an example. Like we are multi-scaled. Uh, we have a multi-scaled bioeconomy, and one of the things that regulates our bioeconomy is our autonomous nervous system. So it's just one of the things that regulate it. And then he talks about the autonomous nervous system, which is something he talks about a lot. And I I think it's just actually to illustrate a point. It's not like it's not so much that the fact that it happens is important, but this whole interaction and how it illustrates how the economy works is what's important here. So you have your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous systems, and the one wants to raise your level of arousal and the one wants to reduce your level of arousal. You need both because you need to be able to run from a tiger and you need to be able to sleep because that's when you recover. So how they work, he uses his hands to illustrate, like the one pulls up and the one pulls down, and that process is the economy, how it regulates itself. It's in interaction. You can't
Mhm.
have just one, otherwise and then he like threw himself on a table, like very. I totally got the point. Like that's not how the way to be. And the other one was he got very excited. Like, yeah, you can't always be on this high arousal state, and you can't apparently be Canadian either. You have to sometimes be able to run and sometimes to be able to sleep.
We can't maintain one state of arousal.
It's opposed in goal, these two states, but it's interdependent in function. And what he's wanting to illustrate here is opponent processing. That
Mm.
is very important in his whole way of thinking, I think.
Mm.
Constantly evolving. Optimization. Optimization, we've heard it this before, that it's about the optimal grip, for instance, that we're trying to. It's not going to be right for once and for all if you hold it like this. There's an optimal grip to different things. So it's about optimizing your state of arousal or optimizing. Everything in your bioeconomy is about optimizing your
Mhm.
your survival.
It's constantly optimizing your cognitive interactional fittedness to the environment. Okay, so it's interesting. I think, and I might be wrong about this, so I want to check with what you think. The sympathetic, right, is trying to arouse us. The parasympathetic is trying to reduce the level of arousal. And then he goes into efficiency and resiliency. And I'm wondering if that's an analogy for that as well. You have that same upward downward relationship.
Yes, it's this opponent processing. Like there's no, you don't want to be only efficient and you don't want to be only resilient, because there's too much waste in only resilience and there's not enough space for error in only resilience. So it's this thing, like the two have to work together. They're opposed in goal, but they're interdependent in function. You have to get the optimal way of being. That is indeed how the two relate to each other. It's the same process, but a different thing happening,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah. They always in biology call the arms race. That's literally what they call it, an arms race between predator and prey. They're constantly evolving, and it's, of course,
Yeah,
environment's going to be impacting that too,
yeah,
but they're moving together in evolutionary time. Yeah, and what, like, trying to overcorrect, or but
yeah,
together still they're like interlinked in
yeah,
that way too.
yeah. The opponent
Of
process. I have to say, I thought about, because I think I've told you before, like the astrology that I read, like the secret language,
Mhm.
our relationship type is enemies type of thing,
Mhm.
opponents.
Mhm.
So me and you and me and Rebecca. It also the name is the cauldron, the shimmering cauldron. So I thought that was actually pretty cool. It's like
Yeah.
the name of our relationship is a cauldron. But then when I thought this, is like, oh, this is the optimizing thing. This is the, like, you need opponents. You need opposed in goal or some opposed in something to be
Yeah.
able to optimize that which is created in between.
Yeah.
It's um,
I think of it like sparring. Like you have to have a
yeah,
sparring partner or a fencing
yeah.
partner.
And that brings me back to the apologetics. Why it's actually such a good way to approach your own uh,
Yeah.
the things that you love, to better understand the things that you love.
Mm. Not all economies are financial, but this is a commercial analogy to show the trade-off relationship. So making a business more effective. And I think it's just another analogy of
Mhm.
maximizing your profit cost, because in order to do that, you fire a lot of people because most of your profit is going to labor. So there's that efficiency is equal to the selective constraint.
Enabling constraints.
Okay.
Yeah, I also only added it later. It's the enabling constraints.
Okay. And that's another push pull or pull pull.
Yes.
When we increase efficiency, we lose resiliency. Make use of the trade off.
And he mentioned our favorite quote again in this episode: the things that make us adaptive also makes us susceptible to self-deception.
This would be one of those moments. I have this vision of me having kind of moments of aporia by myself where I'm like feeding the cats and doing something very mundane, and I just all of a sudden it hits me. And those notes, those piano notes from the beginning of Awakening. Um, the greatest ever. And I just need you to know that if we ever make a movie about our lives, I want that to be when we have a moment of euphoria. Oh, that is the end of that one. I think we struggled through it gracefully, honestly. Well, do you have another quote to take us out then?
Oh, yes, I do. I'm going to read from Plotinus. So I'm struggling through Plotinus, not intellectually so much, although also intellectually, but emotionally as well. Augustine quoted Plotinus a lot, after all, so it's a struggle. Um, but this is beautiful. I'm only going to share the beautiful parts with you and the parts that I can subscribe to easily without emotionally tormenting myself. For the one who sees has a kinship with that which is seen, and he must make himself the same as it, if he is to attain the sight. For no eye has ever seen the sun without becoming sun-like, nor could a soul ever see beauty without becoming beautiful. You must first actually become wholly godlike and wholly beautiful if you intend to see God and beauty.